Hello everyone and welcome to the live session for week 8. Uh, we'll wait for 5 minutes to see if more people join and then we'll start the session. It is 5 minutes now. Although no one has joined, I think we should start our session. Welcome to the session for week 8. In this week, we'll be solving assignment 8 from the previous run. These are the lectures which you would have covered for week 8. So this would be from lecture 36 to lecture 40. First, we would have covered managing urban environments part 1 and 2. In this, we would have covered various components of urban environment. Various components related to air and water quality, how their quality is evaluated, how it's controlled, different mandates, different measures which are in place to do that. Then noise and vision control. Then planning and mitigation tools which are there for managing all these components. Then we would have learned a little bit about different mandates associated to blue and green infrastructure in the managing urban environments part 2. We would have studied various components of blue and green infrastructures, and then you would have studied various mandates associated to them. So that would have been international as well as national mandates which are in place. Then you would have studied traffic and transportation management part 1 and 2, in which I think there was some network error. We'll go back to the presentation. Okay. So coming to traffic and transportation management, you would have studied the background and significance of traffic and transportation management, various elements of traffic management, which would have included both supply and demand side of traffic management. Then you would have studied a little bit about public transportation, also a little bit about NMTs, which is non-motorized transport modes. Then you would have studied various tools for traffic control and management. Then you would have studied in the lecture 40, you would have studied how urban public spaces are designed. So concept and category of different urban public spaces, then various examples of urban public places and how their design and planning is significant in creating more equitable, more engaging urban spaces. Then a little bit about planning and design of the urban spaces, and then several case studies. So now we'll move on to our questions for this week. So this week again, the questions from the previous run are quite similar to the questions which are assigned in this run. So we won't be giving out answers of these questions. We'll just be telling you about the approach to solve them and what background information you need to solve these questions. So question 1, which is choose the option, which is an example of demand side management of traffic. And you've been given 4 options: making new roads, encouraging shared mode, augmenting the capacity of existing roads, and direction control. So in this, you first need to know the various elements which are there in traffic management. So you would have studied there are these elements which are part of traffic management. So there are 3 elements which are related to real-time management, which is traffic information, traffic control, incident management. The most important element for planning is demand management, which this question pertains to. And then there are 2 other elements, driver support and monitoring, as well as fleet management, which pertain to both planning and capacity building. So traffic information, this means traffic information, both collection, management, and provision of traffic information, uh, both providing up-to-date information both for road users and uh, other players who would be involved in the traffic management operations. And then they should be provided both before and during the travel. So for example, before travel would be like a display of different buses which are faring from one location to another, or display of um, fares or various modes of transportation which are available from one point to another point. Then example of traffic information during travel would be like display of traffic related signals, speed limit information, then change of if there are changes in traffic or congestion in a road, or there some roads are closed down for maintenance, or if traffic is too much. So such kind of information can also be shared during travel. Then comes traffic control. So traffic control is basically control per intersection or road in section, or for the entire road network. So it's divided into both fixed and variable type of traffic control systems. So fixed is some kind. It would be some kind of infrastructure or arrangement which is built into the transportation transportation infrastructure. Or variable control would be some type of infrastructure or some type of arrangement which can be changed depending on what time of day it is. Like if it's peak hours, more control or less control would be needed uh, accordingly. So that is referred to as fixed and variable traffic control. Then is incident management. So incident management basically concerns with detection and handling of traffic incidents, or even their eliminations. For example, accidents, and this is done in cooperation with the authorities. So maybe with the police, or maybe with the healthcare provision system, or anything else, even with the insurance companies which handle the uh, accident data or information if they need anything to uh, reimburse the person involved in the accident. So such kind of thing. uh, then the most important element for planning is the demand management. So demand management is basically management of demand of various modes of transportation, or demand at various times, or demand of demand of transportation modes, transportation vehicles, what kind of modes people are using, how far they are going, which route they are taking. So all of these demand in terms of transportation one point to another is referred to as demand management. So this is the most important element for planning. The other two elements, which is driver support and monitoring and fleet management, these are also important components of planning, but they are more important in terms of capacity building. So for example, a lot of drivers, they have basic in knowledge of driving and navigating, but sometimes they need IT support or methods of communication or technology assisted uh, applications, like so okay, so sometimes we need IT and communication supported systems or apps to help the driver navigate better, or drive better. So uh, even information for collision prevention, or the type of driving which people do in which routes, and depending on what kind of traffic, those data can also be collected and then used by different IT companies or other allied players to design better transportation infrastructure, better transportation vehicles and all of that. So all of this counts under driver support and monitoring. Then is fleet management. So fleet management, it covers planning and control of the uh, movement and operation of vehicle fleets and its drivers. So it's basically operation and management kind of thing. So in this, I think it's pretty clear from this description what demand management is. As I explained, it is majorly used to decide how the demand for different demand of different modes of transportation, which route to take, what time to travel, what from which destination to which destination people are going. So either it can be used for modeling all this information, or modeling this traffic movement, or for predicting what traffic movement will be at which time of the day, in which part of the area, or even it can be even used to affect the choices of destination, times and modes of transportation. I hope this makes things clear. So going further, demand management has, as I discussed, it has two basic uses. If you see, first is traffic demand modeling. So in this, you can see you can either use it for estimation of trips, so trips from where to where, or then trip times and all of such things. Then distribution of the trips, then identification of modal split. So in different modes, so there would be some NMT, some public transport, some private vehicle owned traffic movement, some pedestrian movement, all of those things. So how different modes would be used by which kind of population, and during which time of day, which share of which mode would be the most, which would be the least. All such things can be identified using traffic demand modeling. And then assignment of transport means, based on first to third steps. First, estimation of trips, then identification of distribution of these trips, then identification of the modal split. Based on all these, the proper or suitable transport means can be assigned to all of these trips. So this is traffic demand modeling. This can be used to either estimate various components related to traffic, or it can even be used to predict the traffic movement in any particular area. Then is the second component, which I told, which is affecting the choices. So based on different kind of tools, you can say, you can affect the choices of either destination or time of travel or mode of travel, or even the route people take. So first is, for example, you can provide regulations. So you can provide regulations for access. You can restrict vehicular access in some places. You can limit it to only pedestrians. You can regulate where people can park, for how long they can park. Such things can be done. So in a way, when you do this, when you restrict access or when you provide access to certain vehicles at certain places, you are essentially influencing the time of travel of different people and which mode they are going to prefer, which route they are going to take, all of these things. Similarly, you can also do another thing, which is provision of several facilities. For example, you can provide park and ride facilities, you can provide public transport, you can provide suitable traffic information, which can help people decide their routes better, or help them choose which modes to take, which not to take. So this is another thing. Then another thing is supporting. So maybe you cannot sometimes you cannot affect behavior of the people directly, but by supporting some other allied tools, you can affect the traffic behavior. So for example, if you support carpooling, so if you have apps which are allied to carpooling, if someone provides incentives for people to carpool, like the rates of traveling are cheaper or such things, people would carpool more. So using allied technologies or allied techniques to influence people's destination, time, mode, and route choices can also be done. Then is to promote. So there are also methods in which different types of modal choices or route choices can be promoted. So pedestrian friendly construction of pedestrian friendly pathways, or pedestrian friendly areas, or bicycle friendly transport infrastructure can be introduced to promote more walking and cycling. Then more public transport and easier to access and universal accessibility can be introduced in all these cases to promote the use of pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, and public transport infrastructure. Then these are all we are talking about incentives. So then there are again disincentives. So for example, you can put tolls on peak hour. If you are traveling in peak hour, you might have to pay some toll in a area which is very which has very heavy traffic. Then there are road use charges. So if they are applied on some roads where there is very heavy traffic movement most times of the day, then there are fines and penalties which you can introduce for overspeeding or breaking traffic rules and such. So there are also disincentives which can be used to affect the choices of people for different elements related to transportation. So these are the different ways in which of demand of traffic demand can be managed. So I hope this clarifies to you how to answer the first question, and you can answer which option is an example of demand side management. I've put the third question with this because the third question also asks about demand management and traffic management. So it basically asks, demand management and traffic management regulates choice in the destination, time, and mode of transport or route. So this is a true and false question, and we have been discussing since what are the different components of choices which can be affected. So I think if you've understood what components can be affected, you would understand if this question is true or false. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. This is the second question. The question is, the IUCN is an international organization working in the field of nature conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. What does IUCN stand for? Okay, so this you would have studied while studying the international mandates we have in India for management of blue and green infrastructure. In that lecture, you would have studied a little bit about IUCN. So I'll give you a little background of IUCN just as a clue for you to guess what IUCN is. So IUCN was created in 1948, and it has evolved into the world's largest and most diverse environmental network. Why most diverse? Because it's actually a union of experts, influential expert organizations, influential government organizations, non-government organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, and several other organizations which want to be a part of it. And these span over like 160 countries. All of these organizations comes from over 160 countries. So this is what makes IUCN very diverse. So the purpose of IUCN is to, in their own words, it is to advance sustainable development and create a just world that values and conserves nature. So this might give you a little hint to what IUCN does, what it stands for. You might have studied about IUCN in the Green Infrastructure Guide for Water Management, because IUCN was one of the partners apart from WRI and I guess one other partner. So IUCN was a partner which helped in the development of the Green Infrastructure Guide for Water Management. I've also provided a link to their website if you want to go check their website out, see what they do. And I think this is a very easy question for you to answer. So we'll move on to the next one. The next question is, when was the National Action Plan for Climate Change, which is NEPCC, launched in India? So this is a question which asks you when it was launched. So let me just give you a little background of what NEPCC is. So NEPCC is National Action Plan on Climate Change. So it is the basic plan which is the background, or which is like the basic mandate, which is the source for all climate change and climate change mitigation and adaptation legislation in India. So this plan was released by the Prime Minister with the Ministry of Environment and Environment, Forest and Climate Change as its nodal body. And it came after the National Environment Policy. So National Environment Policy 2006 NEP, this was a forerunner for this action plan. So I think this clarifies a little bit when this plan NEPCC was launched. So basically NEPCC outlines a national strategy. The strategy aims to enable the country to adapt to climate change and enhance ecological sustainability of India's development path. So, doesn't compromise on development, but while development being the ultimate agenda, it also focuses on a strategy that can enable India to adapt to climate change and ecological sustainability along with it. Uh, for this plan, there are 8 national missions which form the core of this plan, which are mentioned here. There is National Solar Mission, National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency, National Mission for Sustainable Habitat, National Water Mission, National Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem, National Mission for a Green India, National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, and National Mission for Strategic Knowledge for Climate Change. So these are 8 missions which form the core of the NEPCC. If you want to read a little more about NEPCC, I have provided a link for the press release for NEPCC. But apart from that, you can even read the NEPCC document, and you can even read the individual documents for each of the missions. So you can get to know in detail about each of the mission as well as the NEPCC itself. I hope this clarifies to you what NPCC is, and it can help you answer this question or about when it was launched in India. Moving on to the next question, which is in the context of blue-green infrastructure design, what do the words blue and green imply? Okay, so let's see what blue-green infrastructure is. You would have seen this list of components of blue-green infrastructure during your lectures. So it forms 2 parts. First is the natural components and second is the man-made components. So as blue-green infrastructure says in the term, it's an infrastructure. So it's supposed to provide us some service or solve some problem related to urban environment. So the natural components are parks, green belt squares, natural forest, woodlands, lawns, green buffer, infiltration elements, bioretention gardens, bioswales, shrubberies, etc. And then associated with these natural components, there are other man-made components which are added with the natural components. For example, there are public conveniences. So, in order for the blue-green infrastructure to be usable, there are certain things which need to be provided along with the natural components for it to be usable by the people. So that is why we provide things like public conveniences, walking or jogging cycle tracks, skywalks, gyms, children parks, statues and memorials, open air theatres, sitting spaces, street furniture. So all of these make the green infrastructure usable in some sort of way. Then there are other things like fountains. So fountains are usable in a way that it provides aesthetics. It enhances the aesthetics of any place. It provides identity to a place, but it does even greater things. Like it can create evaporative cooling, so it affects the microclimate of the area where it is located. Similarly, uh, all the blue components of the blue-green infrastructure affect the microclimate of the place. So while providing some kind of benefit or some kind of use to the public, blue-green infrastructure also carry out several ecological functions. So like I mentioned, one function which is evaporative cooling, or in broader term you can say maintenance of the water cycle or urban water cycle, because we are talking about blue-green infrastructure. So always for the blue-green infrastructure to function properly, it would have two components. One is the blue and other is the green. So green, most of us know as seeing the components: parks, green belts, natural forests, woodlands. It is related to various types of green areas. And then comes blue. So if you see some components, you pay attention to some components like wetlands, water bodies, uh, infiltration elements, bioretention gardens, biospheres. So all of these components show very clearly what the blue is. It refers anything related to water. Can be a water body, can be water, but it refers to things which are related to water. Although it might not be very clear what the blue element is in the other components of the blue-green infrastructure, but even parks, which are small ecosystems within themselves, they have some component of water associated to them. Sometimes it is apparent, there might be a small water body, a small pond, a fountain or something. Other times, even if they are not present, there is always groundwater, surface water and such things, which are always an integral part of any uh, green infrastructure. So that is why this is referred to blue green infrastructure, because it is, as you can see from this Venn diagram, there is the blue component and there is the green component, and there is the intersection of these two, which we call as blue green infrastructure. So I hope it is clear to you what we refer to as blue green infrastructure, and you can answer this question. We move on to the next one, which is which of the following policies and or acts are responsible for conserving and maintaining blue-green spaces in India? And we are given 5 policies. First is the National Water Policy 2002. Then you have the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, National Environmental Policy 2006, Environment Protection Act 1986, and Forest Conservation Act 1980. Okay, so let's go back to this question, and then let's remember that blue-green infrastructure can have several components, and management of each component is as essential as the management of whole of blue-green infrastructure. So while seeing this act, it's important for you to see the individual component which this act caters to or the policy caters to. it's possible that the policy doesn't directly refer to blue-green spaces or blue-green infrastructure, but it might be referring to some component of blue-green infrastructure which it is managing. So essentially, by managing that component of blue-green infrastructure or blue-green spaces, in a way, directly or indirectly, it is affecting and managing the blue-green spaces in India. Okay, so with this in mind, now we'll take a look at what all these policies are. So first is the National Water Policy. So the main goal of National Water Policy is to govern the planning and development of water resources and their optimum utilization. And we know water is a very central, one of the two central elements of blue-green spaces, blue-green infrastructure. So there is no chance that National Water Policy is not affecting blue-green spaces. Moving on to the next, which is the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. This again pertains to water, but then it talks about prevention and control of pollution. Doesn't talk about the use. First policy largely talks about the governance part of water and resource optimum utilization of the resources. However, this act, it talks about prevention and control of pollution. So degradation of water resources, uh, protection of aquatic ecosystems, all of these pertain to this. So I think it should be clear to you if this act pertains to blue-green infrastructure or not. Moving on to the next, which is National Environmental Policy 2006. So this has several objectives. We'll go through them one by one. First is the conservation of critical environmental resources. Environmental resources can be many, but we know our natural ecosystems, which of urban green spaces are a part of natural ecosystems. So it talks about their conservation. So it essentially talks about the conservation of urban green spaces too. Then it talks about intra-generation equity. So livelihood security for poor and intergenerational. So I think it's clear that this does not pertain to urban green spaces directly, but there may be some ways in which this affects the green spaces indirectly, which I think you should take a look and try to see it for yourselves how it can affect urban green spaces indirectly. Then integration of environmental concerns in economic and social development. So obviously, as we saw, that blue-green infrastructure is essentially an infrastructure. So when we see when we see an infrastructure is essentially meant to provide us a service, it needs to provide some functions to us. So whenever any infrastructure or functions related to infrastructure come into view, we always talk about economic concerns related to it as well, and also social concerns related to it. So whenever we talk about blue-green infrastructure, it is not possible to treat it as a separate element from economic and social development concerns. So yes, national environmental policy in according to this objective will affect development of blue-green infrastructure. Then is efficiency environmental resources. This is also very clear. Blue-green infrastructure part of environmental resource. Then is environmental governance. So similar to the governance of water, which we said here, this just says environmental governance. So basically different components related to the environment. Then is the enhancement of resources for environmental conservation. So this pertains to governance, and then this objective pertains to the conservation of various environmental resources. So I think it should be clear whether national environmental policy affects the management of blue-green spaces or not. Next is Environment Protection Act 1986. Which aims to improve and protect human environment, most importantly to prevent hazards from happening and causing damage to ecology. So this act actually came after the Bhopal gas tragedy. So it talks a lot about protecting and preventing hazards. But as you see, it talks about human environment and also talks about ecology. So our ecosystems and human environment does not only consist of humans and human made elements, but even natural elements, of which blue green infrastructures are a huge part. So I think it should be clear if the Environment Protection Acts affects blue green infrastructure development or not. Last is Forest Conservation Act 1980. It provides regulations for use and conservation of forest and forest resources. This might be a little tricky for some people to understand because it says forest, and there might be some doubts to someone if forest form a part of blue-green infrastructure or not, or urban blue-green infrastructure or not, because a lot of the time urban spaces don't have natural forests, but Forest Conservation Act doesn't mention which kind of forest. Like, it mentions which kind of forest, and there are different regulations for all of them. However, there are urban forests as well, and this act pertains to urban forests too. So I think it is a good hint to you whether this act will affect conserving and maintaining cool green spaces or not. Moving on to the next and last question. This question is, consider the following trees and select the best suitable option for plantation along the state highways and national highways in India, as per Urban Greening Guidelines 2014, published by TCPO, Government of India. And you are given 6 options: Maduca latifolia, Millingtonia hortensis, Azadirachta indica, Acacia modesta, Dalbergia siso, and Ficus glomerata. So these 6 are the names of different species of plants, and for these species you have to choose which of them are suitable for plantation along the highways. So from the urban greening guidelines, which the question mentions, there are these components which the guideline mentions about tree plantation along the roads. So first is the species should have a long life. Second, the species must grow fast and it should be wind resistant. So it shouldn't topple over onto the road into the incoming traffic. So that is an important criteria. Then it should be deep rooted. Then it should be either evergreen or nearly evergreen, because it would then provide shade to the vehicles or people who are moving on the road. And then the minimum spacing between the trees must be 10 to 12 meters. So this essentially means the trees would have a large canopy. Okay, so let's see. So how to solve this question? So first, Maduca latifolia, you need to see which plant it is. So I think many of you would know this plant is mahua, which we know this plant in India. The local name is mahua. So I won't be telling you if it satisfies all the requirements in the guidelines or not. You can go to this website which I've mentioned, and you can check if it satisfies these guidelines or not. So similarly, for all other plants, you can do the same. You can see the plant, see its canopy, see its size, and you can check for each plant if it satisfies the criteria which are mentioned in the guidelines or not. So for example, this is mahua, then this is the Indian cork tree, Millingtonia hortensis. Then there's Azadirachta indica, which is neem. Then Acacia modesta, which is known as Ulai or Palosa. Then there is Dalbergia Siso, which is known as Shisham or Indian rosewood, and Ficus glomerata, which is clustered fig tree, or it's even known as cooler or Indian fig. So these are all. You just have to go to the website, a credible website. Uh, I visited its website, and it uses good sources for its information, and I think this website is very credible for you to get the knowledge of these plants, and you can see if they satisfy the criteria or not. Using that information, I think it would be very easy for you to solve this question and see uh, which of these plants can be used to plant along the state highways and national highways. Apart from this, another thing which you can do is you can go and check the urban greening guidelines for yourself. So the urban greening guideline, uh, apart from these criteria, it also provides a list of plants which can be planted. So you can check among that if these plants are on that list or not, and from that you can choose if they satisfy the criteria or not. So that is another thing which you can do. So I think it's clear how this question would be solved. This was the last question for today. Now we can take many questions if they are there. Just type your question in the in-call messages and I can get to them. There is Rahul and Vidushi. If you have any questions, please ask.
So I'm still a little doubtful about the policies, but then apart from that, everything else is clear.
Okay, what doubt you have about the policies?
Ma'am, according to me, all the policies are making sense in the blue-green spaces.
So it's possible that all of them are correct.
Probably then all of them would be correct. Otherwise, I would be wrong.
You have to just see that. I have explained to you what blue-green infrastructure is, and I think it's very clear to you that even if the policy affects some component of the blue-green infrastructure, not all of it, it still affects the development, conservation, and management of the blue-green infrastructure. So even if the policy doesn't mention blue-green infrastructure in the policy statement or in the policy document, it can affect directly or indirectly the development of blue-green infrastructure. And if the policy or the document does that, then yes, it is affecting the development of blue-green infrastructure.
Thank you, ma'am.
Rahul, do you have any questions? So Rahul is asking, why are green guidelines not followed while construction of national highways or state highways? Okay. Uh, so this might be a question for debate if the guidelines are being followed or not, because in many cases they are being followed, but I get it. In a lot of cases, I think majority, they are not followed. The planting guidelines, at least, they are not followed. The reason behind this is that these are guidelines, so these are not mandates. So the state government or any government, they are not mandated to follow these guidelines. So there might be some EIA assessment for them, like when roads are built to counter the ecological impacts of building the road. There might be some guidelines or like some uh, plantation which they need to do to counter the ecological impacts of building the road. But these guidelines are not something which can mandate them to make those plantation or to plant the trees. So these are general guidelines. These are not mandates. This is not a policy document. This is not some kind of rule or regulation book. These are general guidelines which are developed by the TCPO, and this is sort of a, you can say, stencil to guide someone how to plant trees, which trees to plant, what their height should be, what kind of trees they should be, and such things. So again, you have to see it very clearly. These are guidelines. So it is good if people constructing the highways follow them, but then again, these are not mandates. I hope this answers your question, Rahul. Okay. Uh, as there are no more people, so I think we've gotten through all the doubts which were there. So I'll close the session for today. If you still have more doubts after the session, please feel free to ask them in the forum and we'll get to them. Thank you for attending today's session and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am.